All right, good afternoon, everyone, to this lecture about the triple layer BMC. My name is Titus Vanderspeck, and I will be doing a guest lecture on this topic today. Just very briefly about myself, I was actually involved in creating and starting the minor that you're currently a part of, but I had to stop teaching because I went on a sabbatical for a while to Bangladesh to try to actually set up some social enterprises there. But because of the virus, that sabbatical was cut short, and we actually had to come back. Um, I am a lecturer at the Hague University and a lecturer at Leiden University at the moment, and I run these kind of courses, the courses that you're currently part of. At Leiden, for example, we're now currently running a COVID-19 startup challenge course, similar to what you're doing, but then to really come up with solutions for COVID-19. So that's really fun. My background is in social entrepreneurship. So I have a PhD in social entrepreneurship and innovation from the University of Essex. Before that, I was an aid consultant where I tried to advise and do research on how aid organizations can become more social entrepreneurial. So the topic that you're studying in this minor is very close to my heart, and I really enjoy it. So that's me. If you are interested in getting to know me a little bit more, I've actually put QR codes up here. If you see, there's one in this slide. You can use the QR codes throughout this lecture. I've placed them on various slides, and the QR codes actually link to articles or things that I want to share with you. This particular one links to my LinkedIn page if you want to connect. So, the topic of today's lecture, if you look at your assessment, it's always good to look at the assessment, right? Just for a second and just see like, okay, how is this lecture even relevant to what I'm doing in the bigger picture of this minor? The topic of today's lecture is actually going to help you write up the operations part of your group report. And now notice that, for example, if you want to get an excellent or a sufficient or a poor, it talks about circular prompts. So how can you make the elements in your BMC more circular? And that's basically what we're going to focus on today to try to get you those good marks as well. So I'm going to give you some examples of that, and we're going to work through how you can actually include this in your report. The question that we are essentially asking ourselves during this lecture is, how can you identify the business model components? So the components, the segments of your BMC or the activities in your BMC where you can enable circularity. And more importantly, why? Why should you do that? Why should you enable circularity? And how does that fit into this bigger picture of social impact combined with commercial viability? Loosely speaking, this class, it shouldn't say class 10 actually, it's just this class, focuses on operations, which is more the left-hand side of the business model canvas. However, operations and this discussion of the triple layer BMC, it encompasses everything. But I do want to focus on a few of these elements, mainly key resources, stakeholders, and channels, just to kind of just give you a bit of a refresher of what these things are and also how they play a role in circularity. So firstly, channels. Channels are essentially the way that your company or your startup idea delivers the product or delivers value to its customer and creates value for its beneficiary. Right? So these are the channels through which you do that through. So examples are through delivery, right? Through having like a bicycle delivery system, if you're delivering a product, through an app, if you're if you're providing a service, maybe through an online channel like YouTube. Maybe that's where you're actually sharing things. Channels is also to do with your marketing. So how do you use certain channels to market your product and your services and your impact? So that's essentially what channels are. And if we go back to, if you can go back this far, I think it was probably lecture 2 or 3 in the course, where you looked at archetypes, or no, that must have been a little bit later when you started ideating on different types of business models, right? So in Diamond 2, you looked at different archetypes, and that's very similar to this discussion of channels. So if you look at all these arrows in the archetype, sorry, this pointing while doing a video is pretty difficult because it's reversed. Okay, so all those arrows that you see, those are essentially the channels or the ways that you actually connect with your customer or your beneficiary or your supplier or you're an intermediary to deliver value and capture value. Typically, we think of this in quite linear structures, right? So I need some raw materials to make my product. I have a place where I make my product. Um, I package the product. The product gets taken to a shop where I sell the product. The shop sells the product to the customer, and we go on like that and that. And this is typically how we think of it. But in this course, I would like you to embrace that there's other ways of doing it as well that are not so linear, that maybe there's feedback loops that come back continuously. And that's the topic of circularity that we're going to cover in a minute. Key resources. What are key resources? Key resources can be kind of summarized in these 4 categories. So you have physical resources. So think about a space where you manufacture your product. Think about an office space. Think about a shop front. So physical things. Also think of like assets like computers or equipment that you need, right? Then you have human resources. So human resources are the people that you need. So the skills and the knowledge that you need to deliver your product, to make your product, to market your product, to manage customer relationships, etc., etc. Financial resources are the resources that you need, so the money that you need essentially to keep your business afloat. So this is maybe investments, subsidies, grants, the money coming in from sales, but also the money going out, right? So this is the financial resources. And then finally, intellectual property. And intellectual property is things that you have made that are valuable to you, to your company, and that make you unique and that you want to protect, typically. So these are things like if you've come up with a unique consulting service, um, or if you've come up with a unique feature on a product that no one else has had, then you might want to protect that, right? And that is worth something. That IP, that intellectual property, is actually worth something to you. It's valuable to you. So those are examples of resources. Resources are things that are valuable to your company and that your company needs to stay running. Partners and key stakeholders. Very crucial for a social enterprise. I would say sometimes even more crucial than when it comes to a commercial business is its partners and its key stakeholders. If you remember this is probably lecture 2 or 3, where you look at the ecosystem in Diamond 1, the ecosystem of your challenge. And you'll remember that you have these players at the bottom. Sorry. Here, you have these players at the bottom. And these players are essentially what we're talking about when we say partners and key stakeholders. These players are the people, the organization, the companies that you need to know well and understand well in order for your business to work. That includes your beneficiary, of course, but that also includes your competitors. It includes maybe partnerships that you have. Maybe you say like, okay, look, these guys are already working on my challenge, and they do something slightly different from us, so we're going to partner with them so we can piggyback off their branding and the customers they already have, right? So these are examples of partners. This is very important for the BMC to understand who your stakeholders are and who the partners are that you might work with. In relationship to that, it's good to talk a little bit about a concept called collaborative bricolage. The concept of bricolage is actually, it's very interesting. You should probably Google it. Google social bricolage if you're interested in learning more about this. But bricolage is a term that's been adopted within the entrepreneurial research domain to refer to the idea that an entrepreneur needs to make do with whatever they have. Right? So whatever resource they have, the resources they have access to, and whatever stakeholders they have access to. And often there's a focus on collaboration within the social enterprise realm. So it's not so much about competing, but it's more about finding people and working together to solve your societal challenge. In the same way, you guys are also confronted with bricolage. I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to build an app. If no one in your team knows how to build an app, and you don't have anyone in your friend circle or your professional circle who knows how to build an app, then you're going to have to find someone that becomes one of your partners or stakeholders to build the app, right? This is the concept of making do with what you have. We always try to encourage, especially students when they're working on a startup, to try to come up with solutions where they can rely on the resources and the stakeholders that they already have access to, right? So for example, if I said, yeah, I'm a student in the minor and I want to solve the energy crisis by building these madly circular, renewable, nuclear power energy plants, let's say. Well, that's a very nice thought, but one, I don't have the engineering and the technical knowledge to do so. Two, I don't have the money to do so, resources, remember. Three, I don't have the network to do that. So it's a nice idea, but I can't really make it happen. The idea is to really focus on finding people, collaborating with people that you can work with, and making do with the resources and the stakeholders that you have access to. A good example of the importance of stakeholders is actually some research that I did a few years ago where I looked at 5 social enterprises. This was for my PhD. I actually went and spent time with 5 social entrepreneurs in Bangladesh to figure out how they work and how they can work more effectively. And one of the things I found is that a lot of these social entrepreneurs actually partner with local NGOs so that they have better access to their beneficiary. And that saves them time and resources, right? So in the same way, the stakeholders and the partners are very important. You need to really consider which partners you need to make your idea work, or which stakeholders you need to create relationships with to make your idea work. And the aspect of operations is all about really bringing these things together, and to look at the BMC and to figure out how it all comes together and how everything operates together, right? And this is why the concept of channels and partners and resources is so crucial to that, because they allow the BMC to really come together and to work and to function. And while we're thinking of operations and allowing the BMC to work, it's good to reflect a little bit on this question. How can we create environmental and social impact in our operations, right? So I know that in Diamond 1, you looked at a societal challenge or an environmental challenge. And now you have a business model that hopefully tackles that challenge. But can we go a step further, is what this question is asking, and make sure that within our operations, so within our stakeholder relationships, within our channels, within the resources we use, that we actually have a positive impact as well, right? So could we use more socially and environmentally friendly operational practices? Could we manufacture whatever the product is that we're using to create the change? Could we actually have some sort of sustainable practices in the manufacturing, for example? So to look at this, I'm going to look at two concepts. Firstly, circular economy, and secondly, triple layer BMC. We're going to briefly look at those, and while we're looking at these, I would really like you to keep an open mind and maybe grab a piece of paper or draw out the BMC. So pause this video and draw out the BMC. And while you're looking at these videos and the things I discuss, make little notes about how your own business model can become more circular or can embrace this triple layer BMC thinking. Okay? So maybe take a minute to do that now and to prepare yourself. So firstly, circular economy. This is a concept that you might have heard about a bit. It's a very popular concept in Holland at the moment. It's growing in its popularity, which is a great thing in my opinion. I'm going to, which is a great thing in my opinion. I'm going to show you a short video that explains circular economy so that you get the gist of it. So here we go.
Living systems have been around for a few billion years and will be around for many more. In the living world, there's no landfill. Instead, materials flow. One species' waste is another's food, energy is provided by the sun, things grow, then die, and nutrients return to the soil safely. And it works. Yet as humans, we've adopted a linear approach. We take, we make, and we dispose. A new phone comes out, so we ditch the old one. Our washing machine packs up, so we buy another. Each time we do this, we're eating into a finite supply of resources and often producing toxic waste. It simply can't work long term. So what can? If we accept that the living world's cyclical model works, can we change our way of thinking so that we too operate a circular economy? Let's start with the biological cycle. How can our waste build capital rather than reduce it? By rethinking and redesigning products and components, and the packaging they come in, we can create safe and compostable materials that help grow more stuff. As they say in the movies, no resources have been lost in the making of this material. So what about the washing machines, mobile phones, fridges? We know they don't biodegrade. Here, we're talking about another sort of rethink, a way to cycle valuable metals, polymers, and alloys so they maintain their quality and continue to be useful beyond the shelf life of individual products. What if the goods of today became the resources of tomorrow? It makes commercial sense. Instead of the throw away and replace culture we've become used to, we'd adopt a return and renew one, where products and components are designed to be disassembled and regenerated. One solution may be to rethink the way we view ownership. What if we never actually owned our technologies? We simply licensed them from the manufacturers. Now, let's put these two cycles together. Imagine if we could design products to come back to their makers, their technical materials being reused and their biological parts increasing agricultural value. And imagine that these products are made and transported using renewable energy. Here we have a model that builds prosperity long term. And the good news is, there are already companies out there who are beginning to adopt this way of working. But the circular economy isn't about one manufacturer changing one product. It's about all the interconnecting companies that form our infrastructure and economy coming together. It's about energy. It's about rethinking the operating system itself. We have a fantastic opportunity to open new perspectives and new horizons. Instead of remaining trapped in the frustrations of the present, with creativity and innovation, we really can rethink and redesign our future.
So now that you've seen that short video, we'll move on to this slide. And this is a nice way of kind of dissecting where we can actually adopt circular practices, right? So the idea of the circular economy is that we move away from what we saw here, this linear supply chain, right? And we try to find more feedback loops throughout so that we reuse resources more constantly. That's the essence of a circular supply chain. Now, let me get back to my slide. Now, here are some pillars which I found very useful. There's an article again on top of areas where you can consider circularity, right? So firstly, the materials that you use to create your product, if you're creating a product, can you somehow reuse those? Or can you get them back to reuse them? Think about it. Energy. Where are you getting your energy from? Right. So if you're running an app or a service, you also need energy. You need energy to run your office building, transportation, even for your employees. How do you get around? All these things require energy. So how can you make things more environmentally friendly, more socially conscious? Water is extracted at a sustainable rate and resources recovery is maximized. Are you using water in some way in your manufacturing? Manufacturing is often very heavy, very water dependent. So you need a lot of water in manufacturing. And here's the thing to think about. It might not be that you are manufacturing the product yourself. Maybe you're buying it from a supplier, But then also think about where your supplier is getting their products from. And maybe you need to change suppliers, or maybe you need to talk to your supplier and say, like, look, can you change some of your manufacturing processes so that it suits me? Actually, speaking of this, I want you to go online and type in buy social, buy as in purchase, so BUY, social NL, and you'll find a website which is a database full of business to business suppliers that supply goods to other businesses that are more sustainable. So, for example, they'll offer you more sustainable food for your office or more sustainable carpets for your office. And you might actually find really interesting suppliers there for your business. So, have a look at that. Next pillar, biodiversity. Uh, are you somehow doing that? So sometimes you see things like that you're using certain materials that are more biodiverse friendly, right? And other times you'll see that people plant a tree for every product bought. Think about these things. How can you adopt these kind of practices? How are you preserving culture? This is a very difficult one to understand. So we don't want to change and exploit cultures. We want to preserve them, right? Culture is art as well, and it's something we want to preserve and keep so that we can understand what people did before us. How are you doing that? How are you being culturally sensitive? Health and well-being of humans. How are you taking that into account in your manufacturing, for example, in your marketing, right? So sometimes now we talk about consumerism within marketing, sales, for example. Some people are starting to question the concept of sales. Should we even have sales when we buy products or when we try to sell products? Because it's exploitative, and it makes people want to buy more. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Something to think about. And human activities generate value and measure beyond just financial. So we've covered that a little bit in a previous lecture, I believe, that you've done on impact measurement. We want to do more than just create financial gain. We want to create societal gain and environmental gain. Yeah. Let's look at another example. Here's a short example of circular practices within the fashion industry. Let's have a look.
Waste in fashion is on a massive scale. It's an industry where less than 1% of recycled textiles are converted into new, wearable materials. Even more ends up in landfills. But very gradually, that may be changing. I'm traveling to the Isle of Wight off the UK's southern coast to find out more. We're on our way to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a non-profit that focuses on the circular economy. The foundation promotes a vision for a fashion economy in which nothing ends up as waste. I'm meeting Laura Baumund, a project manager.
Hi, I'm Laura. Welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Every second, the equivalent of one rubbish truckload of clothing is landfill or incinerated globally. In a circular economy, instead of it operating in this one-way system, we, from the very outset, look at creating something that designs out the waste from the beginning. So in terms of business opportunity, there's a huge spectrum for companies to actually move towards a circular economy.
One company working towards a circular model is in nearby freshwater.
Hi.
Welcome to Timo. I'm Martin.
Madison, nice to meet you.
Timo is an online platform built by the clothing company Rapa Nui. It allows brands to print and create their own sustainable garments. All of its products are made from organic cotton, and central to its business model is combating the inefficiency built into the fashion industry.
So one of the big problems with fashion, as well as the material wastage, is actually is overproduction to start with. We only actually make what people need when they need it, which means making products in the seconds after they're ordered.
In 2018, Timo shipped 1 million shirts. The company estimates that using sustainable materials adds about 25% to costs, but says it offsets that by maximizing efficiencies in other places.
It costs more money, so what we need to do is find savings.
Timo minimizes waste and streamlines production using its own creative engineering.
The whole factory is powered by renewable energy. Everything that we make is designed from the start to come back to us when it's worn out.
So every Team Mail t-shirt has this barcode on the care label, which when you're done with your t-shirt, you can scan it and it'll generate a postage label and allows you to send the shirt back for free. And then Team Mail will give customers a discount on their next order in order to incentivize people to recycle instead of throw their clothes in the trash. There are, of course, a variety of approaches being used to move closer to a circular economy. In central London, I'm meeting with Cindy Rhodes of Worn Again Technologies, which focuses on recycling textiles at the molecular level.
So we've developed a process that can take polyester and cotton, dissolve it in a vat, separate both the polyester and cotton.
Blended fabrics tend to be harder to recycle.
This here is a polyester pellet, which is the building block that then gets melted down, extruded into fiber, yarn, and textiles. Then what we're able to do with the leftover cotton is dissolve that, separate out all the dyes, which then gets separated and spun back into a fiber.
Worn Again plans to license its technology to other businesses, crucially at an affordable price.
It was really important that the process itself is low cost, that we're not creating a premium product that the industry has to pay more for and that consumers ultimately have to pay more for.
In nearby Islington, Jonathan Mitchell, founder of Brothers We Stand, is tackling the challenge from a different angle.
BrothersWeStand.com is basically an online retailer where you can shop menswear that's made more sustainably, often made from recycled materials, but crucially also made to last.
The company makes a small amount of clothing itself and vets all of its suppliers.
We have a 6-point standard, and every product on our site must meet that standard, and it includes points like design to please, made to last, and also standout social and environmental impact.
Brothers We Stand says production costs using sustainable materials are around 1.5 times higher for basic t-shirts, and customers do pay a premium. But despite that, sales have grown by more than 50% each of the last 2 years, albeit from a small base.
More and more people are wanting to consume clothes and also other things more sustainably, and I want to provide a solution to these people.
A recent study by McKinsey found that 78% of sourcing managers said that by 2025, sustainability would be a significant factor for consumers purchasing mass-market apparel. It will not be quick or easy, but as we saw in the Isle of Wight, companies are already beginning to build circular models on a large scale, a sign of things to come.
So that was quite interesting, right? So you really see from a kind of not only a manufacturing perspective, actually more from the consumer's perspective, how they get the goods back and reuse them. Something to think about. I really like this image because it really encapsulates the circular element of the circular economy. And it, again, highlights that at different parts of your business, right? So whether it's in designing the product or acquiring raw materials or the production or the transportation or the actual use by the customer, that you can look at all these steps in your supply chain and see where you could become more circular, right? So maybe just like the previous case, it's about collecting, right? So maybe you need to collect your resources back and reuse them more effectively. Here's another example that I'm going to show you, a short clip of circular practices, this time within the hospitality industry. And just notice how many different things they try to incorporate. So it's not just one practice, but they're doing many different things. It's very fascinating. And some of them are really unique, in my opinion. So have a look.
And now, a new movement that is bringing together big businesses and environmentalists with the goal of rethinking the value of waste. Jeffrey Brown reports from Amsterdam. It's part of our weekly segment on business and economics making sense.
Away from Amsterdam's iconic canals and museums, a different kind of attraction. A place where the offices and hotel are made out of old boats. Solar panels power most of the buildings, and the herbs used at the popular cafe are grown using fish waste. And that's not all that's helping them.
This column, it's connected through the piping that's on the wall to urine that we've collected from the dry urinals in the cafe and also from our building. We can add some chemicals and then we get these crystals that are actually fertilizer.
Welcome to Decoval. Quirky and off the beaten path, its own little neighborhood in the midst of the larger city, it's a laboratory to test a new approach to waste-free, sustainable living.
This was wasteland that was polluted that we got to reuse in a beneficial way. And
Ava Gladdick, an American who's lived here for more than 10 years, is founder of Metabolic, the company that spearheads the project.
We took a bunch of old houseboats, we eco-retrofitted them to make them as sustainable and energy efficient as possible. We tried to reduce the amount of infrastructure necessary to run this site, so there's nothing dug into the ground. The boats don't have sanitation, so they all have compost toilets and gray water treatment systems using biofilters. The soil is being cleaned using plants, and we have a lot of different experiments on managing urban resources.
Small experiments for now, but based on big ideas.
Cities are functioning as global resource drains. The metabolism of cities is linear. There's all this stuff coming in, it's getting processed, turned into waste, and then it gets spit out. And actually we need to create a circular metabolism.
Decoval is rooted in the so-called circular economy, a radically new way of thinking about the future that's built on a relatively simple idea. Maximize the use of raw materials, turn waste into a valuable, reusable commodity so that nothing in the end is really wasted. The goal, a healthier planet and economy. And while the models are speculative, some studies suggest potential benefits are massive. For example, by getting more value out of existing materials, Europe could see an annual benefit of up to $2 trillion by 2030.
So I hope that was nice to watch. Take a moment as well to think about some of the things you've seen in these examples and think about how you might want to use them in your own ideas, right? Might be useful. Now we move on from circular to the triple layer BMC, or the triple layer business model canvas. I believe you've all been introduced to the business model canvas, and this is essentially adding an extra layer to it. So let's have a look. So this is the business model canvas, right? You've seen this before. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 segments, and the idea here is that you consider each segment, you consider how each segment affects other segments, and if you can fill this out, then you have a pretty good idea of what your business model should look like. But now I'm going to challenge you a little bit, and I'm going to suggest let's consider the triple layer BMC. Here's a QR code to a bit more of a scientific journal article about how this was developed and who developed it. So it's good to read, actually, as a bit of a fundamental reading about this topic. If you notice, if you go back to the BMC, we still see the same BMC at the very top. Very top. And that's the economic side. But what they've done is they've added 2 layers to the BMC, one being the environmental layer and one being the social layer. And they're basically saying you need to consider these 3 layers in order to have a BMC that embraces the triple P's, people, planet, and profit, which is something you might have covered. Basically the 3 pillars of sustainability. If you cover people, planet, and profit, then you have a more holistic business model. And these guys have worked that out into a BMC, which is super nice. So let's have a little bit more of a in-depth look at this. So we already know the economic layer, right? So the economic layer is about finding the right partners to make your business work, having the right marketing activities to sell your product. It's very much about the product and the manufacturing side of things. Totally fine. The environmental one is also similarly about the same things, but it tries to consider different things while manufacturing or marketing. So it tries to look at what kind of energy sources do you use? How do you use water? What is your environmental impact? So at the bottom it says environmental impact, whereas for economic it says cost, right? So this is again impact measurement, right? What is the actual environmental benefit? That's impact measurement. Um, what kind of how is your customer, when the customer is using the product or the service, is there something that we can do to make it more environmentally friendly? So for example, in the machinery where a cup is offered, or in recycling the products that we're selling. So this is very good to think about. Just methodically look at each of the segments and think, okay, how can I make each segment a little bit more environmentally friendly? It's essentially all we're doing. And it's good to learn from people that have already done it before. So look at examples. Here's an example from Nespresso. And you see on the left-hand side, you see their kind of linear supply chain, right? That goes up from coffee farming to product transportation, to packaging, to roasting, to distribution, to consumer use and end of life. And on the right here, you see, on top here, you see some examples of how they've incorporated new practices to try to make a difference at different points in their supply chain. So for example, in the production of packaging, they have up here powering our factories and boutiques with green energy. So the production is done through green energy. What else do they have? They have improving the efficiency of our machines. So they use less power. They've got a certification, I see, a AAA sustainable quality certification of where they source their coffee beans, which is the first one, the coffee farming one, right? So you see how they're trying at different points of their supply chain to make a change. And in the same way, if you were to draw a linear process of a linear diagram or visual of all the steps you need from beginning to consumer or end of life of the product, how does it change the way you think about those? And where could you add elements that are circular, right? End of life, by the way, which it says over there, end of life is the end of the product. So if you see they have a coffee capsule in there, from if you have a coffee machine, the end of life. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase or sustain the end of life so it can be reused, so that the coffee capsule could be reused, for example. Then there's no end of life, or the end of life changes, so there's less waste. So that's what they're saying here. The other layer is the social layer. So again, at the bottom we see, instead of cost and revenue, we see social impact and social benefits, right? So this is impact measurement. We also see the focus of local communities instead of partners and stakeholders. So how are you in keeping local communities in mind, or how are you involving local communities? We see society and culture. How are we keeping cultural elements in mind? How are we creating and enhancing awareness among the end user? How are we making them feel good? Right? What is our product actually doing for them? So same as the environmental, just go through it methodically and look at each aspect and try to reflect on how you could change aspects in your business model. And we see this is again the example of Nespresso, where we'll just zoom in on a few. But for example, it says they want to make resilient farming communities. So this has a lot to do with the local communities on the left here, the local communities that actually produce their product, that they get paid well, that they take care of economic stability, that they look at productivity. Important that they help those communities. The consumer experience, we see that they focus on transparency. So they try to be transparent in their practices, have more certification. If you have a certification like a fair trade certification, it helps because it proves that you meet a certain quality. On the other hand, on the other side, they talk about our people, right? So this is their actual employees. How are they having a social impact on their employees? So they talk about women empowerment here, but also safety and health and employee relations. So this is super interesting. Try to think, how can I make the internal mechanisms of my business model more social as well? Even though I have a social impact through the external, through creating value externally, even internally, could you do certain things to really almost embrace the philosophy of social impact even within your business practices, so that people see the way you manufacture, the way you deliver your product, and they're like, damn, that's really cool. Like, they're actually making a difference as well, even within their model, not just outside their model. And yeah, I like this visual to kind of sum it up. You see that what they're basically saying is they affect each other, right? You want to look at how there's coherence across the economic layer, coherence across the environmental layer and social layer, but also then penetrate through them and make them connect to each other. So whatever you do socially will impact your manufacturing economically. Whatever you do environmentally will have an impact on social as well. Another nice link to kind of wrap this up. If you click on this link and you scroll down to the second page, there's actually the BMC is outlined there with some questions. It's very small in this slide, but if you open the link, you'll get it in a bigger version. And those questions will make you think about, for each segment in the BMC, how you could change something slightly, or what questions you can ask yourself to make that particular segment more circular. So I encourage you to look at that. It might help you for this week's challenge. So remember, for the criteria of your group report, you need to look at operations and how you can consider, like, draw up the BMC, of course, but also try to figure out how you can make it more circular. I'm not in charge of this course this time, but I'm sure that your lecturers wouldn't mind if you, for example, did the triple layer BMC and actually made it and filled it out, or if you looked at some circular practices and showed how you've incorporated those in your supply chain. So those are some tips for you to consider. Last example, just to close off, here's an example of the lease model, which is being experimented with a lot in the last few years. This is the example of Mud Jeans, and what they actually do is they lease jeans. So here they call them a rental model for jeans. And their aim is to have more impact on the planet, on you, and on the company itself. So you see again, right, how they're focusing on various aspects, just as we saw in the triple layer BMC and in the circular economy. They're trying to think in a more multi-dimensional way. And what they basically do is they have a membership fee to join, which is 29 euros. Then you have a monthly fee of 750 for the jeans. You lease it for 12 months. They reach out to you. You can decide to keep your jeans longer or to switch them and get them recycled, and the cycle continues. Whether it's expensive or not or good, I don't know. I haven't actually used this. I did once hear that Mud Jeans was struggling a little bit with staying on the market, so it's also interesting to consider whether they found that optimal balance between the economic, the environmental, and the social layer. Because you still need to, even if you have a lease model, your customer still needs to find the quality versus the price a good balance as well, and a good balance with the impact it has. So you have a lot of different things that you kind of have to juggle and keep in the air and find a balance across. And this was on their site as well, which I thought was a nice little closing slide. It's time to rethink what we consume and how we produce. And I think that kind of sums up very nicely the end of this lecture. So thank you very much. I'd encourage you to think about this question: how can you make your startup idea more sustainable? And if you do that, I think you're going to get to a good place with your operations as well. So thanks and good luck. I hope your ideas go extremely well, and I'm sure they'll be amazing. And I'm going to watch the pitches if I can. So see you. Bye.